Good afternoon and welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from a Frontier. Let me start with macro thoughts. We call it a Grand Cru, which in wine terms means a very good vintage, said Dirk Teels, the Brussels-based head of investment management at KBC Asset Management. Scorecard tells the story. American equities up 28%, a global stock market gauge is up 23%, credit index rose 10%, emerging market sovereign dollar bonds added 12%, treasuries up 7% and gold 15%. So a really remarkable year, and I'll touch on this in my article that I wrote. Oil and equities lead as almost every major asset is a winner. That's from Holger. World's best performing currencies this year, incredibly, Ukraine's currency was top of the league, the Russian ruble second, and the Egyptian pound third. And it's important, currency overlay juices returns or denudes them. Know where the algos live, tweets Northman trader, and he was the catalyst for an article I wrote on the 11th of November. The markets are run by machines, computers, algorithms, and bots. 2019 was the year of no normalization. Central banks injected more liquidity and kept rates at dangerously low levels. That's D. Lacalle. On the questionable excuse of downside risks, thus running out of tools to address a real downturn in the meantime, which is a fair point. And in that article of 11th of November, I was saying that this is a house of cards of simply monstrous proportions and has been bulked up with the steroids of free money, negative interest rates, and quantitative easing. And I quoted T.S. Eliot, "Here we go round the prickly pear. Here we go round the prickly pear at 5 o'clock in the morning. This is the way the world ends. This is the way the world ends." Home thoughts. Yesterday was the winter solstice, the Himal solstice, or the hibernal solstice, also known as midwinter, occurs when one of the Earth's poles has its maximum tilt away from the sun, happens twice yearly, once in each hemisphere, northern and southern. The winter solstice is the day with the shortest period of daylight and the longest night of the year. Warm wishes for the winter solstice, which falls this year on the 22nd of December, the sun at its lowest ebb in the sky. The year's tides turn. Rob G. McFarlane. This is the megalithic tomb at Newgrange, Ireland, circa 5,000 years old. Its main passage oriented to the solstial winter sun. In this video clip from Laurel Finds, you see Aztec dancers bringing the fire, and a hush falls over the crowd. This is to celebrate the winter solstice. And here, sunrise at Stonehenge on the winter solstice. And that took me back to the article I came across in Brain Picker. In these dreadful wastes of perennial ice and snow, man feels the force of the superstitions of past ages and becomes willingly a worshipper of the eternal luminary. I believe all 7 billion human beings alive today are part of one human family. We are born and die in the same way, the Dalai Lama. And what is most precious in our relations with others is warm-heartedness. It yields the peace of mind and inner strength that are fundamentals to a happy community. The evangelical magazine Christianity Today has called for President Trump's removal in an op-ed, criticizing the president for being immoral. The editor-in-chief, Mark Galley, gave an interview, and that clip is on Rich Wrap-Ups. The interview was with NPR. And then from there, I went to the Pope, who says, "J'ai décidé d'exposer ce gilet de sauvetage, crucifié pour rappeler à tout l'engagement impératif de sauver toute vie humaine, car la vie de chaque personne est précieuse aux yeux de Dieu." My French isn't that great anymore, but what he's saying is every human life is precious in the eyes of God. And to wit, have a look at the image. Thomas Daniel, this is the Taj Mahal at Agra in 1798 by William Dalrymple. This is Samawati House, Masambweni Beach via Nomad Magazine, Africa. A 4-bedroom, double-story coastal home in which all the bedrooms are upstairs and sea-facing, looks rather wonderful. This shot was taken on our way out of Amboseli National Park. It was around 6:30 p.m. and the sunset was absolutely stunning, so we stopped and I took this shot, Rahim Kara, Nomad Magazine again. And then the sunrise in the Masai Mara photo by Japan via Kenya Pics. And then watch this footage from Vala Afshar. Incredible moment as Jane Goodall and team release a rehabilitated chimp back into the wild. I went back to In Memoriam, Ring Out Wild Bells, Alfred Tennyson, ring out wild bells to the wild sky. The flying cloud, the frosty light, the year is dying in the night. Ring out wild bells and let him die. Ring out the old, ring in the new, ring happy bells across the snow. The year is going, let him go. Ring out the false, ring in the true. Ring out the grief that saps the mind. For those that hear we see no more. Ring out the feud of rich and poor. Ring in redress to all mankind. Ring out a slowly dying cause and ancient forms of party strife. Ring in the nobler modes of life with sweeter manners, purer laws. Ring out the want, the care, the sin, the faithless coldness of the times. Ring out my mournful rhymes, but ring the fuller minstrel in. Ring out false pride in place and blood, the civic slander and the spite. Ring in the love of truth and right. Ring in the common love of good. Ring out old shapes of foul disease. Ring out the narrowing lust of gold. Ring out the 1,000 wars of old. Ring in the 1,000 years of peace. Ring in the valiant man and free, the larger heart, the kindlier hand. Ring out the darkness of the land. Ring in the Christ that is to be. Political Reflections. This is a podcast. It's about 30 minutes. It's rather good. On the trail of Xi Jinping. A new podcast by Jane Perlez. As I said in my last article, China at 70, Xi has taken the propagation of ideology and the cult of personality to extremes not seen since the days of Chairman Mao. Leon Lidigu, who tweeted, "The young people of a modified India currently protesting over what they see as anti-Muslim citizenship bill have raised the bar on how to deal with the police sent to disperse by all means." As I said on the 2nd of December, I believe the politics of ethnocratic nationalism are a bust. primarily because of the economics. To be governed is to be kept in sight, inspected, spied upon, directed, law-driven, numbered, enrolled, indoctrinated, preached at, controlled by creatures who have neither the right nor the wisdom nor the virtue to do so. Prudent, via Pankaj Mishra. 19th of August, I was writing about Kashmir, and I said it was described by Nehru as the snowy bosom of the Himalayas and is currently switched off from the 21st century. That was August 19, it still is. And then Leon tweeted, when the snow falls and the white wind blows, the snows have come to Kashmir. The BJP thinks it's going to Indianize Kashmir, he wrote. Instead, what we will see is potentially the Kashmirization of India, the story of Indian democracy written in blood and betrayal. That was from the New Yorker. Giuliani isn't the puppet master. He's a puppet. He's literally doing performance art, and we're forced to consume it as infotainment. This is portless glam in an interview with Greg O'Lear. It's really quite remarkable. Giuliani may seem like a buffoon, the court jester and the opera buffer that is Trumpland, but what he's been doing for the last 3 years could not be more serious. After falling off the radar following his aborted attempt to land the Secretary of State gig in late 2016, Giuliani has re-emerged as the key figure in the Ukraine scandal that this week led to the president's impeachment. But at no point in the last 3 years did he ever actually go away. And context is everything. The Zelensky quid pro quo was but a still shot from an epic motion picture that has gone on for more than 3 years, and it's absolutely a horror movie. From the hour he vanished from the scene almost exactly 3 years ago to the present day, Rudy has been operating as Trump's informal cybersecurity advisor. Vinagate, that was when Giuliani colluded with the Trumplandia, the FBI's New York field office, to basically resurrect the Hillary Clinton email investigation. It was more or less an active measure, and when it compelled Jim Comey to write his fateful memo, it absolutely cost Hillary the election. And it was a repeat attempt, wasn't it, on Biden? This is the Jeremy Corbyn legacy. That's from Martin Plaut. Global temperature map. Australia is on fire. That's via Reddit and Simon German. As I said, the end is nigh. Feedback loop and the risks of dieback, where we enter a phase of cascading system collapse. International markets. Trump Xi phone call on trade deal is the lead story on China's 21st December 7 p.m. news. That's via Karl Mintzner. Beijing must be getting more comfortable with both content and likelihood of deal to tie Xi to it personally in such a public manner for domestic Chinese audience, and that's the point. Hugh also reiterated the point China-US trade talks have a bigger impact on the US markets than Trump impeachment. Most of the energy of the impeachment has been released, while the real good news of the trade talks has just started to emerge. He says this will help Trump to hold more initiatives in the election. Trump tweeted, had a very good talk with President Xi of China concerning our giant trade deal. And if you take all those remarks in the mix and you consider that both of them need a truce, Trump for the re-election, Xi because of a soft economy, then you'll appreciate, I think, we have actually reached an inflection point. Let's move on to the currency markets. Euro 110.84, dollar index 97.662, Japanese yen 109.40, Swiss franc 0.9819, the pound 130.22, the Aussie 0.6906, India rupee 71.1638, South Korean won 1161.97, the Brazilian real 410.23, Egyptian pound 1603.75, and the South African rand 14.2709. Dollar index chart 97.665, but I think we'll see a softer dollar in the first half of next year. Euro dollar 110.84. Since the launch of Amazon's delivery service in February 2018, FedEx has lost $25 billion, 39% in value. Despite the S&P gaining 24%, Amazon has added $240 billion, 33%. This is Professor Galloway. This is a chart, Amazon versus FedEx from TradingView, and he's written a tremendous article, Professor Galloway. No mercy, no malice, logo FCKDEX, FedEx. In the next 24 months, FedEx will either be acquired or lose an additional 40% in value. The likely acquirer is Walmart, the gangster move, a merger with Shopify. In July 2017, we predicted if Bezos tomorrow said we see overnight delivery as a huge opportunity, the $150 billion of market cap of DHL, FedEx and UPS would begin leaking to Amazon, like it did when they announced that supermarket acquisition. In less than 2 years, Amazon captured nearly 1/5 of the market for e-commerce in the US. Since 2014, US e-commerce has increased 84%, creating a massive opportunity for the delivery industry. But instead, there's been a transfer of wealth from FedEx, UPS, and the US government to Amazon. Network effects, cheap capital, idolatry of innovators, and a feckless DOJ FTC have resulted in a monopoly era where a wildly profitable business, phones, digital marketing, loyalty programs, cloud, Yoda dolls, can generate such staggering value, antimatter, that entire industries become loss leaders, features, to differentiate and protect the antimatter. Netscape, the fastest growing software firm in history, went from antimatter to feature when Microsoft began bundling Internet Explorer with Office. Perhaps as a coping mechanism for realizing the significant damage he levies on the world, Zuck has developed the attributes of a sociopath. At some point, he'll likely be criminally charged. And then talking about I think it's a tremendous point what he's making, and saying that Amazon's charging $80 for 600 pounds of boxes from a seller's warehouse versus 104 at FedEx and 160 at UPS. The real virus infecting the stock has already taken hold of the delivery firm's corpus. Amazon did a Jedi mind trick last week, banning merchants from using FedEx, convinced the markets with a single press release that FedEx has regressed from growth to mature to a declining firm. In 24 months, FedEx will not exist in its current form, a lack of innovation and a competitor who can overwhelm enemies with cheap capital and Jedi mind tricks has featurized one of the great success stories of modern business. We are barreling towards a country with 350 million serfs serving 3 million lords. We attempt to pacify the serfs with more powerful phones, bigger TVs, great original scripted television, and Mandalorian action figures delivered to your doorstep within the hour. Jumia, the Citron research was the note that collapsed the share price. Mosi Hezbon asks, is there any hope? I think not. Let's turn to the commodity markets. Gold last trading at 1483.50. Crude oil had a soft session on Friday and it hasn't found $60.12. Argentina, 15 exchange rates and capital controls, an economy destruction machine. That's Mr. Lacalle again. Africa, Emmanuel Macron, j'ai souhaité engager la France dans une réforme historique et ambitieuse de la coopération entre l'Union économique et monétaire West Africaine et notre pays. So he's saying, nous le faisons pour la jeunesse africaine. This is it's a very incremental reform, I must say, of the CFA franc. I wanted to engage France in a historic and ambitious reform of cooperation between the West African Economic and Monetary Union and our country. We do it for the African youth. Let us have the courage to move forward to build an uninhibited partnership with our partners. With the reform of the CFA franc, we're taking a big step to write a new page in our relationship with Africa. And Le Monde Afrique has written about it. Click on that. West Africa renames CFA franc but keeps it pegged to the euro. Cut some of the financial links with Paris that have underpinned the region's common currency since its creation soon after World War II. ECO will remain pegged to the euro, but the African countries in the bloc won't have to keep 50% of the reserves in the French treasury, and there will no longer be a French representative on the currency union's board. This is a historic day for West Africa, said Ivory Coast President Alassane Ouattara during a news conference. It's the end of certain relics of the past. Yes, it's progress. I do not want influence through guardianship. I do not want influence through intrusion. That's not the century that's being built today. The CFA's value relative to the French franc remained unchanged from 1948 through to 1994, when it was devalued by 50% to boost exports from the region. So, an important development. I don't think it's that as dramatic as some people will have hoped, but I think it makes sense in the context of the situation we're in. How Putin got a new best friend forever in Africa. Alpha Condé of Guinea had a favour to ask Putin when the two presidents met at the Russia-Africa summit in the Black Sea resort of Sochi in October. I would like, if possible, to spend most of our meeting in a one-on-one format, because I have things to say to you that are not worth discussing in such a large group, the 81-year-old West African leader said. My pleasure, Putin replied, as aides began to herd the several dozen officials and reporters in attendance out of the room, leaving him and Condé alone with their respective translators. Russia is throwing its weight behind Condé's undeclared campaign. This makes Guinea holder of the world's largest deposits of bauxite, a key raw material for making aluminium, the latest focus in a renewed tug of war among global powers for influence and profit across resource-rich Africa. Putin is widely viewed as a kind of guru in Africa, Victor Boyarkin said. People come to him for advice. The IMF called the poor, mainly Muslim nation of 13 million a fragile country with heightened risks of social and political instability. And this is all about him seeking a third term. Dmitry Peskov said Russia isn't involved in anything to do with Guinea's internal affairs. Boyarkin blames the protests mainly on outside forces and nothing but praise for Condé. I consider him a saviour for Guinea. He said to Putin, since the days of the Soviet Union, you have been alongside us, protecting us. Here you see a photo of the two of them. And I wrote about Putin's new arrival in an article called From Russia with Love, and indeed Putin's making a very interesting play on the continent. Zimbabwe, hear the voice of God, the Africa Report. Mnangagwa told us that the voice of the people was the voice of God. Now the chickens are coming home to roost. Mnangagwa is more excoriated than the man he ousted, his erstwhile chief Mugabe. As 93-year-old Mugabe was humiliated and harried from power by greedy politicians and power-hungry soldiers, a worse fate could await Mnangagwa as popular anger grows towards elite corruption and repression. With all that help, Mnangagwa managed only to get 50.8% of the votes. There were far more protests than celebrations as the reality dawned on the country. As Mugabe's security capo, Mnangagwa struggled to convince the skeptics he would respect human rights. On August 1, in response to protests against delays in the election results, he sent in the army. In January 2019, citizens angered by spiraling fuel prices took to the streets. He sent in the army again after public sector workers mobilized in protest at wage cuts after a massive devaluation of the currency. The leader of the doctors' union was abducted, detained for 5 days, tortured, and then dumped in the outskirts of Harare. Mnangagwa allowed businessmen such as Kuda Kwashe Tagwire and his company Secunda, in partnership with Trafigura, to retain a monopoly over fuel imports. The economic tally of Mnangagwa's rule is a return to hyperinflation. Any prospect of the government restructuring its foreign debt and bringing in new capital have receded into the distance. Not only has Mnangagwa's regime failed all the tests he set it, but the situation has now reached breaking point. The only conceivable beneficiaries would be the people with the guns, not the fat cat generals, air marshals and spy masters, but the angry young officers who have seen this predatory elite steal their futures. Their revenge for the ruling elite's crass betrayal of the liberation cause could turn into Zimbabwe's ugliest moment yet. 21st of January, I said what is clear to me is that Zimbabwe is at a tipping point moment. I also said the mind game that ZANU-PF played on its citizens has evaporated in a puff of smoke. 9th of September, I said Emerson Mnangagwa, who is eulogizing Mugabe as a revolutionary icon, has failed and is frankly as untenable as his erstwhile mentor. An EGM of Mikleys Limited last Friday voted to sell Mikleys Hotel, for decades the crown jewel of the empire. Al Bawadi of the UAE is buying it for $20 million. I've said on the 14th of October, the canary in the coal mine is Zambia. Fitch affirmed Zambia CCC long-term issuer default rating affirmed. So really, it's essentially a default. This is the funeral of Rashid Staggy taking place in Durbanville, Cape Town. I like this from Daniel Marvin. So basically a group of friends have been running this country. Have a look at the photograph. South African all shares up 8.86%. Dollar Rand 14.27. I think the next stock is a 13 handle. Egyptian pound 1603, third best performing currency this year. EGX 30 up 6.57% year to date. Lagos building luxury homes in face of an affordable housing crisis. They come from the countryside, from the villages, from the capital city, or from neighbouring countries, energetic, ambitious, full of hope that they'll find jobs in a community and better lives. Few find what they come for, yet they keep coming. Not to London or New York, but to Lagos, the Nigerian urban sprawl that's an unrivaled magnet for people in Africa or anywhere. A city of less than 1.5 million in 1970, Lagos is growing so fast that population estimates vary by more than 10 million. By the end of the century, Lagos will grow to 88 million, making it the world's largest city, according to the University of Toronto's Global Cities Institute. Quite a story. Here you see vehicles sitting in traffic on the Lagos-Ibadan Expressway. A girl walks across trash in Bariga Shanti community in Lagos. Nigerian all shares down 15.6% year to date. Ghana Stock Exchange is down 11.06% year to date. Kenya is the top performing sub-Saharan African stock market, up 16.7%, followed by Egypt 4.8%. Nigeria is minus 14.7%. Cheapest market P is Zambia at 5.2 times. My article over the weekend was In Memoriam, Ring Out Wild Bells. I said the end of the year is upon us and it is that time to ring out wild bells. The year is dying in the night. Ring out wild bells and let him die. Ring out the old, ring in the new. Ring happy bells across the snow. The year is going, let him go. Against a global backdrop which was hardly conducive, what with the crossfire of a trade war now ebbing well for a few months because Trump has an election to win and Xi has an economy to rescue. And a global revolution which Bloomberg Opinion's Pankaj Mishra headlined thus: "A global anarchy revival could outdo the 1960s," and added that acknowledgement of the state's authority as ultimate arbiter is now rapidly disappearing in not only Hong Kong but also India and many other countries. It is being replaced by the conviction that the state has lost its legitimacy through cruel and malign actions. As Pierre-Joseph Proudhon, the pioneering thinker of anarchism, put it, "To be governed is to be kept in sight, inspected, spied upon, directed, law-driven, numbered, enrolled, indoctrinated, preached at, controlled, estimated, valued, censured, commanded by creatures who have neither the right nor the wisdom nor the virtue to do so." In such a complex, non-linear and interdependent world where feedback loops can start spinning at dizzying speed, it is in fact easier to look backwards and into the proverbial rearview mirror. Internationally, Dirk Thiels of KBC Asset Management pronounced, "We call it a grand cru," which in wine terms means a very good vintage. The scorecard tells the story. America's equity benchmark has climbed 28%. A global stocks gauge is up 23%. A worldwide credit index rose 10%. Emerging market sovereign dollar bonds added 12%. Treasuries and gold advanced 7 and 15% respectively. Turning our gaze closer to home, we must first start with a currency overlay, because as I'm sure you're aware, Venezuela and the likes of Zimbabwe oftentimes top the league in percentage terms. But when you convert its worth, it's tuppence in hard currency. Whilst Kenya shilling, which is plus 1% in 2019, did not match the Egyptian pound's 12% gain, the shilling's performance is more than respectable, especially when you consider it against the SSA scorecard. I don't need to repeat that the Zambian kwacha is the third worst performing currency in the world, the Ghana cedi has fallen 25 years in a row, and so forth. The Central Bank of Kenya has to be commended for their FX operations. Of course, the IMF have previously cited the shilling as overvalued, and if we do go to that institution for support, which is as sure a thing as the Aga Khan's Shergar was, we will need to be alert to any shilling quid pro quo scenario. So the shilling has been a performer and has surfed on a rising tide of remittances, $2.4 billion on a 12-month running basis at the last count. The governor, Dr. Patrick Njoroge, also bounced the government into touch. You will recall CBK warned the National Treasury that the CBK is of the opinion that aiding by printing funds to pay debt will be a zero-sum game. I don't need to tell you that such an outcome would kneecap the shilling. Our Eurobonds have performed well in large part because of a benign international backdrop of extreme low interest rates globally, which lifted EM and frontier bond prices as an asset class, unless you're in Zambia where Eurobonds are yielding 20% because no one believes they will pay you back. The government of Kenya Eurobonds, which are all denominated in dollars, are as follows. 10-year issue, which is now 9, is around 6.1%. The 30-year, now 29-year, 7.8%. 12-year issues at 7.1%. Government of Kenya shilling-denominated bonds were very well supported during the interest rate cap regime by the banks. However, Moody's recently pronounced the following. Kenyan lenders are the second most exposed to the government, with almost 300% of their equity lent out to the state. However, Egyptian banks are even more exposed on lending. Cairo 603% of their equity. What this tells me is that an important source of buy-side demand for Government of Kenya shilling paper is now limit long. If you're sitting on the credit committee of a Kenyan bank and exercising some degree of oversight, I would argue you would be demanding a hard cap. Therefore, given the fact that GOK issuance is not going to slow down, but will probably accelerate, I would be keeping a close eye on the curve. Staying Ahead of the Curve was a remarkable book by the renowned investor George Soros. It's worth reading. The Nairobi All-Share served up, and I was a day off, 15.8% return in 2019, and that's quite a decent outcome when you consider the volume of profits warnings. But essentially the all-share performance speaks to the increasing bifurcation between the big cap stocks outperforming and the zombie or penny stocks underperforming woefully. Dr. Mangi's Equity Bank led the charge with a 53.52% gain in 2019 and has further to go. Dr. Mangi has spread his wings, diversified the bank's risk across sub-Saharan Africa, and the model is working a treat. I reckon there is a lot further to go. KCB Group rallied 41.52%, NCBA 23.02%, Barclays 19.18%. The banks were repriced higher on the removal of the interest rate cap regime. Safaricom rallied 39.19%, and this rally was driven by another sterling performance of M-Pesa, whose value remains, in my opinion, undervalued by more than 50% on the balance sheet. International investors, I am reliably informed, were not excited by the proposed Ethiopia JV, and clearly the company has to do some work around persuading investors that they have the bandwidth and an attractively structured vehicle for that. The bottom line is, if Safaricom does well, so does the Nairobi Securities Exchange at a headline level. I wish you all a Merry Christmas. Forex at risk as imports beat exports to the rest of Africa. Cash spent on imports from African markets lasted 168.741 billion shillings, and that's a 4.22 billion trade deficit in the first 9 months of the year. Banks are struggling to auction properties at a minimum bid price. This is in Business Daily. Here you see the 2018 Eurobond issue. This is via Cyton, 10-year at 5.9%, 30-year at 7.7%. Here you see the 2019 Eurobond issue, 7-year at 5.8%, 12-year at 6.9%. T-bill yield 7.2% for the 91-day, 182-day at 8.1%, and 364-day at 9.8%. Kenya shilling is seen here in this chart. It's up 1.1% against the dollar in 2019. NSE is trading at a P ratio of 12.5, a dividend yield of 5.7. CBK warns that the NSE is vulnerable to concentration risks. That's the zombie versus big cap bifurcation. Top performing stocks in 2019, Equity Bank 53.52%, KCB 41.52%, Safaricom 39.19%. And NSE finally minus 8.82% year to date. I'm going to take my leave for a few days and take a bit of a break, but I'm really grateful for all the support you've given me this year. Thank you.